Hello and welcome to the Business of Winning podcast, brought to you by Performance Insights, providing expert speakers and hosts from the world of Formula One motor racing to corporate events and conferences worldwide. Just click on www.performanceinsights.co.uk and send us your requirements.
You're most welcome on this latest episode of the Business of Winning podcast, and I'm very pleased to say that on this episode I am joined by Claire Ritchie, who is a long-standing friend and associate, as you will come to hear, and I'll relate how I first met her when I was pitching sponsorship to Nortel Networks way back in 1998 when I was at Jordan Grand Prix, and we're going to have a walk through her career as a woman who has achieved great success in the sports marketing world in Formula One, has led her business to great success and is now Executive Vice President International for the Revolution sports marketing business based in the United States. And we're going to talk about a whole range of topics to do with the sponsorship and sports marketing environment in Formula One as we find it today. Hope you find this interesting because Formula One's going through quite a surge in terms of its commercial strength. I think we all know there's well over 300 companies sponsoring Formula One these days, Formula One teams, and of course the World Championship itself. And that's actually one of the topics I talked to Claire about. Are there actually too many sponsors? Is it a little bit cluttered, for example? So I hope you really enjoy this conversation. And of course, if you're enjoying the podcast, please like and subscribe. We enjoy getting feedback, and our intent is to keep the podcast going through 2025, covering the business of Formula One by talking to people who are at the coalface of the business, both now and over the last years, because I think it's great having really experienced people come in and talk about Formula One and give us perhaps a bit more depth and context to the sport as it is today. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Claire, and thanks again for listening to the Business of Winning podcast. So Claire, it's really such a pleasure to have you join us on the Business of Winning podcast. And I think the first thing, before we get into some of your backstory, is if you could just let the listeners know about Revolution. What's the company about, and what might Formula One fans recognise Revolution for in terms of the sports marketing landscape?
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and it's a pleasure to be here. I would say Revolution globally is known for sports marketing through integrated services. So right the way from sponsorship consulting, brand creative strategy, PR and comms, experiential events. So really looking at sponsorship and then being able to activate it across the board and being able to deliver that globally, whether that's in the US, Europe, or in Asia.
And are there any brands that you can mention that we might be familiar with from a Formula One perspective?
Yeah, so we're currently working with Komatsu. So personally, I brought Komatsu into Formula One with Williams last year.
Just a small deal then.
Small deal. Very proud of that one. But we also work with NetApp, we work with Chipotle, and to a lesser extent, Tata Communications. We do more with them in MotoGP.
Yeah, and for the uninitiated, so NetApp, they're a partner with, I believe, Aston Martin F1, and then Chipotle with the Haas team. How easy is it for you and for your company Revolution to work with multiple F1 teams? I mean, there's obviously just as much bitter rivalry off track on the commercial side as there is on track in the sporting battle.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about the relationships, and obviously being in the paddock for 25 years, we've built relationships across the board. And, John Rawadi, our CEO, first worked with McLaren in the early 2000s. We were working with Williams in the early 2000s, and obviously with Jordan Grand Prix as well with you. So I think it's about professionalism. It's about the respect and the credibility managing things in the right way for the client. And just to say on that, we work brand side, so we work on behalf of brands. That's one of the key differentiators for Revolution, is we don't represent rights holders, we don't represent athletes. We work on behalf of the brands to make sure that the brands get what they need out of a sponsorship, and that they reach their business objectives.
Now, Claire, I said in the introduction that you and I have known each other for, goodness, 26 years now. And we met when you were an executive at Nortel. And of course, Nortel went on to sponsor Williams. Not sure I should tell listeners that you rejected our approach from Jordan for Nortel to sponsor Jordan, but we didn't hold that against you. And
But it wasn't me personally either.
nah. But but anyway, that's all the kind of interesting cut and thrust of the commercial side in Formula One. You meet sponsors and you're pitching all the time. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But let's just go back to that era, because Nortel Networks, big name at the time, came in as a partner with Williams and really introduced you personally into the working in the Formula One environment. How was Formula One back then, and how much of a bug did you catch from working in Formula One with a team like Williams?
Well, I think first of all, at the time, Nortel was selling through distribution. So in the UK, that was through BT and through different channels globally. It was only in Canada and North America that they was actually known as Nortel. So one of the reasons for getting involved in the sponsorship was to try and build the brand globally, and obviously Formula One was a great platform to do that on at that time. Interestingly, I'd always wanted to work in sport. Apart from being a PE teacher, there wasn't really much to do around, degrees in sports marketing and things that there are nowadays when I was at university. So I went into tech and spent 15 years in tech overall. But, I was actually on a beach in Australia on a sabbatical when I got the call from Nortel asking me whether I'd like to do that role when I came back. And it was a new role that was created, Formula One sponsorship manager. I thought about it for about 2 minutes and got back to them. And I mean, they had 110,000 employees at that time. So for me, it was a massive privilege to be asked to do that role. And part of the reason I think I was asked to do the role was the fact that I'd been in the business 8 years by that time. I had great connections. I knew how to navigate my way around the organisation, which is, I think, one of the key things for a sponsorship manager in-house, especially in a global organisation. But I'd also been in product marketing, channel marketing, brand, run some of their biggest channel and customer events. And so I guess that those skills all came together to enable me to deliver on the role that was needed in this particular case.
And of course, you quite rightfully, as an organisation, decided to work with Williams, 16 times world champions. Of course, not an upstart Irish team like Jordan Grand Prix as we were back in those days, but working with Williams in what was still very much their heyday as a team. It was a big organisation, was a competitive Formula One team. How was your experience of that? I mean, presumably you had a perception of Formula One coming into it, and then you had the reality of working at the forefront with a team of Williams's calibre.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was very interesting because actually, as a Canadian company, Nortel were about to sign on the dotted line with BAR Honda at the time. At the very last minute, as a result of some lobbying by good old Dominic Riley on Jim Long, who was the president of Enterprise at the time, he persuaded them to switch, and that was really driven by the B2B opportunities with Williams as a team. Obviously it was great to be able to work with Frank and be around with him and Patrick at that time, and Jim Wright, the commercial team, Louisa, Victoria. I think it was a eye-opening thing for me to suddenly come into that environment, but hugely rewarding as well.
Now, you caught the bug sufficiently that when Nortel's Formula One program ended, you decided to take the plunge and set up your own organisation. That's one heck of a change of gear from working in a company of 110,000 people to starting up on your own, I think in Henley at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what actually really happened was I did two full seasons, and then I thought if I'm going to stay in tech, I probably better get a real job because this was sort of a periphery job that was out on the side. And actually, I went into global account sales and had ExxonMobil, Dell, Compaq as my accounts, but the recession had started, or the industry had taken a bit of a dive. And having gone from this full on role of Formula One, being busy, 18 hours a day, traveling all over the world, I was suddenly sat in the office in Maidenhead twiddling my thumbs because nobody wanted to buy anything. And as you rightly say, Nortel downsized. I had the opportunity to leave. And I thought, you know, I think I could do a better job than some of my agencies. I had other offers to go into tech companies, Motorola, so on and so forth. But I thought I needed to give myself the opportunity. And I gave myself 6 months and I said, if it works, I'll carry on. And if it doesn't, I'll just get another job. And, appreciate that I came to you at that time with a sort of business plan outline saying, want to work with, my vision was working for tech companies in sport and entertainment to be able to showcase and tell their stories, which 24 years ago was quite ahead of its time. Now, obviously, everybody's generating content and telling their stories through that type of platform. But at that stage, it was something that was pretty unique, and I think that we were the only company in the world that was actually had that proposition.
And tell me about the trajectory that Sine Qua Non, your company, went on, because presumably there were a few, well, probably ups and downs, but also milestones in the success that your company achieved over the next 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you start out as a one-woman band, it's and go from corporate where you're occupied, and you sort of, I guess, working for somebody, and it's about being self-motivated, but also going out and winning business and actually then delivering on the business. So, you're trying to juggle many things at the same time. I was telling somebody the story the other day that we got to a point where I needed to hire an employee, and she was coming from Italy, and on the day that she was due to arrive, she just didn't arrive. And I rang her and said, "Where are you?" And she said, "I'm not coming." So all of a sudden I'd invested in an office, and because I was working from home up until that stage, that was probably about 18 months in. No, I mean, I won my first client in the first month, because I had some gardening leave and had some time to get everything set up and everything before then. So we did get off to a pretty good start, but the ups and downs over the years, and very grateful to work with Amation, that was a partner of Jordan Grand Prix at the time, and then we ended up doing a piece of consulting for them to look at their Formula One sponsorship, but they were wanting to go into a B2C environment, and obviously Formula One's very expensive to go large and to have big branding. So we ended up putting them into MTV at the movies, and suddenly we're going to the Cannes Film Festival, organising stretch limos in Hollywood and taking them to the movie awards and things like that. So very, very exciting environment, just to be starting out in. And then ups and downs. I mean, the recession of 2008 hit us hard. We'd grown to that stage to about 9 employees. We'd done the deal with SanDisk, with Ducati and MotoGP, and with Dorna for SanDisk as well. I mean, you can't legislate for a recession, and thank goodness we've been pretty astute with our money at that time, and did have some backup, which took us through to 2010, 2011. And we were in a pitch situation for Hyundai Motorsport when they were setting up in Germany with their rally program. And we were invited to pitch, and we won that pitch, and still, thankfully, to this day, still have Hyundai as a client. And just last weekend, they won the World Championship. So it's been a great journey with them as well.
That's a hell of a long time for an agency to retain a client relationship, because I think you and I both know most business relationships go through a cycle. Sometimes it can be incredibly abrupt, a year or two, and it's all over. But to be with Hyundai for well over a decade, nearing on a decade and a half, quite frankly, it says a lot about the relationships that you and your team must have built with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we have had that longevity, and I think that's the thing that kept us going, especially during COVID. Once again, you think, oh, we're going to fall off a cliff and what's going to happen here. But, thankfully, I guess over the years, and my vision is really interesting. My vision and John Waddy's vision were exactly the same. We started the businesses 2 months apart, him in September 2001, me in December 2001. With this idea about fully integrated services around sponsorship. And so in 2005, we bought a tech PR agency as SQN. And then in 2016, we bought our creative agency so that we could actually have everything under one umbrella. And I think really that saved us during COVID, that we were able to switch fully to digital. I mean, we were obviously delivering digital anyway, but there were, being an event agency as well, we were doing quite a lot of on ground stuff, and of course with COVID that all stopped. But the digital side of the business, moving into esports and sim racing and that sort of thing, helped us tremendously, and we were able to ride the wave.
How do you begin to, as an agency, diversify into all of these new categories? I mean, within the last few minutes, you've mentioned the fact that you moved from Formula One to MotoGP to World Rally Championship, then into the digital space with the growth in esports, etc. Presumably, as each new trend emerges, you need to invest in the talent and the skills to be able to offer value to the companies that you work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's about, once again, it's the relationship. I mean, I know that when we were acquired, Revolution were absolutely blown away by the fact that we've hardly ever pitched. So all our business has come organically, more or less all of it's come organically. I said the Hyundai was a pitch, but we've probably pitched very few times in comparison to most other agencies. But it's the strength of relationships, and myself, Chris Hughes, Claire Ritchie had great networks and cultivated those networks and called upon them, and then then there's the whole referral of people that have done business with you, and then they move companies. And we were very fortunate, literally just after COVID, to have an opportunity with a former client who picked up the phone one day and said, I'm trying to do a deal in Formula E, and I'm not really getting anywhere. Can you help me? And I said, well, what are you trying to do, and why are you trying to do it? And he explained a little bit more about it, and I said, actually, I think you'd be better doing this rather than that. So gave him some consulting and some guidance, and we ended up putting Algorand at the time into Envision Racing, which was, for them at that particular point in time, was absolutely the right thing to do. So I think it's about maintaining those relationships, and as you say, the longevity of some of our clients speaks for itself.
Now, we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion in not just motorsport, but in society as a whole. And Formula One and the world of motorsport has gone through quite a big change, I would say, over the last 10 to 15 years, with a lot more gender equality. And yet here I am talking to you, a woman who has been extremely successful at what you've done over a 25-year period. So in many ways, something of a trailblazing career. What's your experience been like as a senior female executive in the sport? Have you met resistance along the way?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I was brought up with three brothers. So I was in a male-dominated environment at home. And then my first job was with HP in the labs in Bristol, and there were 200 men and probably 20 women. So it wasn't an unusual environment for me to be in from that perspective. And I think, you've known me long enough that I treat people as people. And it doesn't matter whether you're the president or the janitor, you'll still get the same respect from me. And I think that's helped me quite a lot. And I think the other thing is that fortunately, I guess, have been able to hold my own where I've needed to, and to have some strengths of steel every once in a while. I mean, we're talking about Bernie and saying, had a couple of run-ins with him during my time, and then being in the UK in bed asleep, and Pasquale's calling me saying, Claire, come to my office now, when he's in Melbourne. And it's like, so I guess there's those things where it's just about, I guess, being strong, and dealing with things in the right way, and always being professional.
I mean, you mentioned Bernie and Pasquale. My goodness, one of those names gives me shivers up my spine, and it's not Bernie. Talking about the change that has occurred within Formula One, we are living in a pretty buoyant time for the sport. What's your view of Formula One's commercial trajectory from the Ecclestone era then through to Liberty's ownership and where we are today in 2024 with the Netflix effect and all of that? How have you witnessed the growth?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Mark. I mean, I think, in the days when we were working with Bernie and trying to bring technology companies into Formula One, I mean, they hadn't even really thought at that stage about how the technology roadmap really looked. And I remember sort of trying to bring Cisco into them in like 2007, 2008. And they said, oh, technology as a category. And I said, yeah, but there's so many aspects to technology as a category. And they hadn't even got to the stage of sort of breaking it up at that point. So, you'd have a software provider or a hardware provider or Wi-Fi or whatever it would have been. And obviously that gave them huge opportunity to monetize the categories rather than just having technology as a category. So I think, they needed to learn quite quickly at that stage. I think the other thing is that we all know that Bernie wasn't really interested in the younger generation and Gen Z and so on and so forth. And, social media just didn't figure in Formula One's trajectory at all at that time. And obviously Liberty coming in and changing that and realizing that the younger audience was where the lifeblood of the sport was going to go, and it needed to be there, and also the US market. Obviously Drive to Survive has been hugely successful and completely changed the makeup of Formula One in terms of the audience demographic, with girls and women as well, and bringing in the gender equality and into that as well. But I think the commercial opportunities are driven by audiences and the size of the audience and the value that the audience can bring to the partners, and I think that the numbers speak for themselves in Formula One, and Liberty have done a great job of harnessing that and driving it.
So obviously Bernie Ecclestone's last period as chief executive of Formula One, the sport was owned by a private equity company who, as we know, were very happy to take the profits that were being made by Formula One at the time. There has to have been a huge benefit to Liberty being a media and entertainment company. They just understand consumers and audiences that much better, don't they?
Yeah, totally. And it's funny because I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday about US sport and how it's a spectacle. And obviously that's what they've brought in, and that sort of knowledge and know-how that they've brought into Formula One. And really, really sort of changed the way it was presented. Made it much more of a show, and, with the concerts and things like that as well.
Let's talk about a facet of Formula One that I find interesting, because when I was frankly selling sponsorship at Jordan Grand Prix and Red Bull Racing, one of the things that began to crop up, and this is going back quite a long time ago, but even back in the 2000s, potential sponsors would ask about they wouldn't usually mention the word sustainability, but they'd talk about the environmental impact of Formula One. And of course then that subsequently became environmental sustainability, and then it actually became a reason why companies wouldn't associate themselves with Formula One. It was perceived as gas guzzling and sort of slightly hedonistic sport. That seems to have changed now, with Formula One making a lot of noise really since the Liberty era started around the energy efficiency of Formula One cars. Of course they've got this 2030 net zero carbon strategy, which we're now effectively halfway through a decade of change on that. How important do you think it was that Formula One, and indeed motorsport as a whole, took on board the fact that it needed to change its positioning and be seen to address this topic?
Yeah, totally, Mark, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I remember having conversations with brands probably, I don't know, 2016, 2017, and Formula E was the thing that people were interested in because it was electric and it was environmentally friendly and so on and so forth. So I think Formula One realised that they had to step up to the plate and do something about it, and clearly, with the new fuel regulations and the new car regulations for 2026, I think the need, I mean, and it's also about just global footprint, they would be remiss not to address it, and I think that the fact that they are addressing it, they have started to address it, obviously made the pledge to 2030, as you say. I think that all those things are combined now with the spectacle that it is, has basically made it a lot more attractive again. I mean, I had brands that were talking to us at that sort of era that I was just saying, and we were talking about cycling and we were talking about sailing and things that were much more environmentally friendly, but nowadays Formula One's right back up there, people coming to us wanting to be in Formula One, wanting to be associated with it. So yeah, I think they've done a good job of the repositioning and the commitment to the future.
Can you talk to me about clutter in terms of sponsors? Because I mean, I sat down earlier this year to write a column for Grand Prix Racing about the sponsorship landscape in F1, and I added up well over 300 companies involved in Formula One across the 10 teams. And then, of course, Formula One itself has increased its portfolio of championship partners. And then recently we've seen a huge 10-year deal agreed with LVMH and Formula One, and then Nestle announced Kit Kat as the official chocolate bar. Going back to your point about categories, I mean, goodness me, the official chocolate bar of Formula One. But what about the clutter? Because does there come a point at which brands just see it's too difficult to get visibility and awareness above all the noise created by all of these other partners?
I think it depends why the brand's going into Formula One in the first place. And we talked a bit about Komatsu earlier on, and that piece of work we did with them was, I guess, textbook for us in terms of how we like to work. So a piece of consulting to look at the different sports with them, to see, understand their audiences and so on and so forth, and then be able to go and talk to the sport that is the right sport for them, and then talk to the teams and so on and so forth. But a lot of their objectives were around recruitment. So yes, it's about building the brand, but one of their things was to try and attract people out of university to come and work for Komatsu, and they've done an amazing job with that. The pop-up, which is one of the reasons why Williams actually was the right choice for them, the pop-up stores that Williams have in cities around the world when they go to Formula One races, where they have the simulators. In there now is a Komatsu simulator. So in addition to driving a Formula One car simulator, people can get on a digger or some sort of heavy vehicle simulator and have a go. And it's just opening up people's eyes, and I think it really depends on the objectives that the brand has as to whether the clutter is a problem or not. But many brands are using it for things that people don't even realize, employee engagement, things like that are not just the awareness of seeing the brand on the car. So I think I guess it's about the categories, and if you've got too many competitors that are also in Formula One, then you don't stand out when you're doing things like point of sale and things like that. But I think there's space.
Now, I remember when you started handling sponsorships in MotoGP, you used to head off to MotoGP events, and I used to be quite envious. It's not a category I've ever worked in. Liberty have acquired MotoGP, and the big question that so many people have is, can Liberty do to MotoGP what they've done to Formula One? What's your kind of take on that, and the opportunity for MotoGP to be taken on to the next level, and maybe even to have some kind of collaborative platform with Formula One as the two-wheeled world championship?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, I loved Formula One in the days that I was working in it all the time. But when we went to MotoGP in, I think, 2006, it was a bit of a breath of fresh air. It was much less regulated. It seemed to be a bit more of a friendlier environment. You could get up close and personal with the riders and the teams. And that's always been something that I think MotoGP has flourished on and differentiated itself on. So I'm hoping that doesn't change. I think there's some professionalism that Formula One has that they could bring to MotoGP as well. But I think it's going to be a balance and making sure that you don't lose the essence of what MotoGP is. And also, I mean, 45-minute format for races is probably more digestible to today's audience, to be honest, than an hour and a half or 2 hours of Formula One racing. No, I think it would be interesting to see if they bring it together. It's the pinnacle of four-wheel and the pinnacle of two-wheel racing, and it would be interesting to see somewhere along the line, those two things come together in a weekend.
Now, I want you to answer the following question honestly. If you had the choice between a weekend spent in the pit lane in a MotoGP race and a weekend spent in the pit lane at a Formula One race, what would Claire Ritchie opt for?
I would opt for MotoGP. I'm really sorry.
Yeah, there you go. I knew you were going to say that. I've got to. So our mutual friend Toby Moody, who of course is he's a big friend to us on the Business of Winning podcast, and of course he's always talking to me about MotoGP. So I might have to make a final effort to go. And what do you think that's down to? Is it the accessibility that MotoGP offers, and maybe the friendliness of the people involved in it?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, from the very first time we went, we were welcomed and accepted, and there was much less of a, sorry to say, big I am, that goes with Formula One sometimes. People were probably more humble, and yeah, I mean, I guess, it's interesting because it's obviously mainly run by Spanish and Italians. So you got the Southern European flair, probably versus sort of the British stiff upper lip of Formula One. But yeah, I mean, I think definitely, and yeah, Toby and I worked together closely at times in the past as well, and I think just the camaraderie that was in MotoGP was significant.
So what next for you and for Revolution? Your company was acquired by Revolution just over a year ago, is that right?
Coming up for 2 years, Mark.
2 years ago. My goodness, time flies when you're having fun. So what next for Revolution? Because the company obviously has already achieved a huge amount and is a global business, but the ambition must continue to be there to keep growing.
Yeah, absolutely. And our history has been to acquire through acquisition, and growth through acquisition rather. Revolution UK was acquired, Sine Qua Non was acquired, SQN as we now used to call ourselves because people couldn't say Sine Qua Non in the end. But I feel hugely privileged to be entrusted with the role of coming out here and setting up Asia Pacific. Part of that is to service existing clients that we have that operate globally. So the Hyundais and the NetApps and the Komatsus that have operations here in Asia. So to be able to deliver for them, but also to build a business, and Revolution's model is to be self-sufficient, integrated. So services are available in the States, in Europe, and so part of my remit here is to build out a service stream for the likes of PR and comms, experiential, so on and so forth, consulting, and build an account team here that can manage and deliver on the clients. So from a global business perspective, we're hugely excited about the opportunity that we've got. John was out here a couple of weeks ago for the first time and saw what we're doing, and met some of the clients, some of the prospects, some of the government entities that we've got here in Singapore. And one of the reasons we're in Singapore is that they want to be the sports capital of Asia, and they're going about that in the right way, and it's hugely exciting to be here.
Well, Claire, it's been a pleasure to speak to you today, and thank you very much for giving up some of your valuable time to join us on the Business of Winning podcast. Great to have a chat with you. Maybe we can catch up on a future episode to talk about the ins and outs of the commercial world of motorsport.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark.
Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe to the Business of Winning podcast. And if you want to learn more about performance insights, simply visit our website at performanceinsights.co.uk, providing expert speakers and hosts from the world of Formula One motor racing to corporate events and conferences worldwide.